My name is Vanessa Proudman. I'm the Director of SPARC Europe, and I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on Reimagining Academic Career Assessment. I'm thrilled to welcome 192 participants and counting. And this webinar, it concludes a project seeded about a year ago. It was the last time I was abroad, actually, in Brussels, where DORA, the European University Association, and SPARC Europe, we've been working together over the last year to bring a range of stories of innovation and change related to academic career assessment, to bring that to a wider audience to help stimulate and inspire reform in this area. So the three hosts for today, because it's a joint effort, they're organisations representing different communities, but with all one stakeholder in common, and that's the higher education community, the research community. And improving research culture is really core to our work. So we've got the European University Association representing Europe's universities and national rectors' conferences with 850 members from 48 countries to its name. We've got SPARC Europe, and I'm Director of SPARC Europe. We're an open science and open education policy and advocacy organisation, which was established in 2004. We're striving to make open the default in Europe, and we have about 150 members from over 20 countries. And then we have DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which has clearly voiced why moving away from journal-based evaluation is so important. And over 19,000 have so far formally agreed with DORA and have signed the DORA Declaration. But what does it mean to implement the DORA principles? That's why we're here today. So there's one thing signing onto some principles, but how does it actually work in practice? But let me just say a few words about the context that we find ourselves in today before I hand over to my colleagues and the experts, some of those good practices that we brought to you today. So as we're all well aware, research assessment practices are deeply ingrained in the cultural, historical practices of our countries and our research institutions and structures. However, we're seeing global changes that are really affecting how we reward and incentivize research. Firstly, international, national, and institutional research policymakers have put open science high on the policy agenda as a vehicle to more broadly disseminate our publicly funded research and raising thereby the scientific and societal impact of that research. However, we won't be able to make the cultural shift necessary to disseminate our content more openly in a research assessment system that relies on the journal impact factor, and one that doesn't include a wider range of mechanisms to reward research and open research. But we are seeing numerous activities funded by the European Commission and others to explore new ways to reward and incentivize open science, for example, via its Open Science Working Group on Rewards and Recognition and its OSCAM matrix. And more work is ongoing with a stakeholder meeting coming up shortly. We've also got a more recent initiative that we're also part of, recommended by the Open Science Policy Platform, to develop a kind of research assessment registry to map out all the activities going on in this area. And we're currently scoping that out. And of course, for some years now, we've also seen international research funders, such as the Wellcome Trust or the European Commission, or national research funding collaborations in the UK, for example, with its Research Excellence Framework, moving away from the numbers game and rewarding the intrinsic merit of a range of research outputs, including peer-reviewed research publications, software, data, and other narratives that demonstrate societal impact, also to increase public engagement. And some funders are implementing evaluation criteria that reward open science practices directly, making them part of grant conditions. But this is not yet widespread. But how far are nations and their research institutions ready to take action in a similar direction to change their research assessment practices when hiring or in their promotion and tenure systems? So in the universities and research communities. So like funders, some research communities and institutions are indeed seeing that, again, judging the success of research through journal metrics no longer works for them, if it ever did, for example, in the social sciences. They're dissatisfied with the publish or perish culture, which can be at the cost of good research, and they're losing good early career researchers to some of these pressures. And the well-being of young researchers is an increasing concern. Research institutions are also recognizing that the new digital research processes and the dissemination of that research requires new skills and talents, which also needs promoting and rewarding accordingly. And what does it mean to be a good researcher? Following ethical practices and research integrity, supporting transparency and being recognized or assessed for that good practice is increasingly a must. There's also a greater focus on equity and diversity, including gender, in the research institution. And of course, going back to open science, implementing open science policies and OA targets are a priority at rectors' conferences and at schools of research institutions. And lastly, higher education institutions are increasingly considering striving for excellence, not only in research, but also in teaching, which is not always taken into account in career assessment or in furthering the career of the academic. So as a result, institutions are reviewing their research assessment practices, and we have a number of them with us today. And they've changed their promotion and tenure systems. Some of these forerunners are with us. So without further ado, I'd like to pass you on to my two colleagues who will take the program further. That's Brecht Sarnen, who's Policy and Project Officer at the European University Association, and Anna Hatch, who's Program Director at DORA. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for a great introduction and sort of overview of the project. Like Vanessa alluded to, documentation of good practice exists, but these examples often leave out valuable information about the process of change itself. These are things like the motivations, the people, the types of people involved, and then how policies and practices are developed and implemented, what exactly they are, and what is that time frame for change. So the goal of the case studies was really to provide a structured overview of different dimensions of institutional change happening at academic institutions and national consortia. And really the overarching goal of the case studies and the report is to inspire and identify emerging pathways of change. So today, we're going to walk through 4 key dimensions of institutional change. Excuse me. So we'll walk through these 4 dimensions of institutional change and call on panelists not to talk about their entire case, but really to draw on specific aspects of their case study related to the dimension of change that we're focused on at that moment. Please, I invite you to add any questions or comments in the Q&A box. If you're on social media, we invite you to use the hashtag academic assessment. And then furthermore, I think, when thinking about institutional change for academic career assessment, the first question that we really were keen to examine and dive into is what exactly changed in terms of policies and practice. And with that, I'm very pleased to pass it over to Brecht, who will share some of our main findings for this dimension and talk with a few of the panelists.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you for that introduction. Could you just move to the next slide? Thank you. My name is Brecht Sarnen, and well, good morning to everyone joining us from the US, and good afternoon to everyone joining us from Europe. And as Anna just said, these 4 dimensions is what we want to go through today before we get to a full Q&A session with the audience. And the first dimension is the what. And the what really is about what exactly do these initiatives try to accomplish? What are their objectives, their goals? And also, and very interesting for I think this webinar to draw out is, what exactly have we learned already from these initiatives? What were sort of the first challenges, the first lessons learned as they were being implemented? Now, just very quickly before I hand over to a couple of our speakers, I want to set the stage is that across the 10 case studies that are included in the report that we've compared and are included in the repository, we see that, perhaps unsurprisingly, they share very clearly the same objectives and the same long-term goal. You can see that on the screen. The goal for all of them is not necessarily to abandon quantitative publication metrics as part of their career assessment approach, but in any case, move away from them, move away from relying on publication metrics too much and move towards a more holistic approach where the assessment approach is more adept at incentivizing and rewarding a much broader range of academic activities. So those are shared objectives, and they're not just being done for their own sake. They are in function of a long-term goal that is also shared across the case studies. And the long-term goal is they want to improve the academic culture. The question behind all these initiatives is, if we change the career assessment approach, how does that help us improve the academic culture in our institution or in our national system? But, and if we can just go back one slide, thank you. As soon as these initiatives are being developed and implemented, we immediately see that there are a few challenges, there are a few questions there. And I want to invite the first speaker, Nele Brakke, from Ghent University in Belgium, to talk a little bit about one specific challenge that they faced, which was limited awareness. And Ghent University, I think, as most of you know, or are finding out now, is one of the institutions that moved away almost entirely from quantitative metrics in their career assessment of the professorial staff. And once that initiative was implemented, the institution got a lot of questions from the professors and had to provide them with an answer. So Nele, if you could just walk us through some of the questions you received and how your institution tried to deal with that.
Yes, thank you, Brecht. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Maybe just mention that when we launched our new qualitative evaluation system, that we actually met three kinds of researchers. Of course, you have the early adopters who really are very happy and willing to engage. Then you have the people who will probably never engage with the new system, most of them because they did very well under the quantitative evaluation system, so they show a lot of resistance. But then the larger majority of people were happy that we were changing from a very quantitative output-oriented system towards a more narrative-based approach. But they also showed some or a lot of insecurities and uncertainties. And well, when you come to think of it, I think this is quite natural and normal, because we are changing their evaluation system. And evaluation and promotion, of course, for professors like for everybody else, is very important, and people really wanted to do well. So we got questions like, can you send us an example of a successful narrative? Can you show us what we have to write down to get a positive evaluation and then promotion? Or they also asked us, I have written my draft, could you please comment upon it? What can I do better? What can I change in order to meet the requirements? Which of course was kind of contradicting what we wanted to do, because at Ghent University, we are looking for very unique and personal narratives. What are you as a professor doing within your research, teaching, leadership, within your societal engagement? And how do you fit in the larger research group, the faculty and the university? So there is no one size fits all narrative that will guarantee someone to get promoted. So what did we do? Because of course we had to take those questions seriously, because you have to move that group of people from the a little bit hesitant to the adopters. So what did we do? We did not give them examples. We do not have a set of narratives, not even invented narratives. We do have a template, so they know what we are looking for and what kind of information needs to be provided. And we have a very still not an exhaustive list of examples. For instance, how can you, what can be included in a narrative about teaching? It can be about teaching bachelor's, undergraduates. It can be about developing innovative training programs. So we have a very long list. It's inspiration, but it is so long that, well, you cannot think that you have to do everything. We also explain that. And then a final thing that we did, and that was quite important, we organized an information session for professors. And we, from the policy advisor side, we did not give those information sessions ourselves. Those sessions were given by people very high up in leadership. So the director of research and the director of education, which in more common language in academia is the vice rector for research and the vice rector for education, they gave those information systems. Our rector or vice rector also repeated and made the message stronger. So I think that's it from Ghent University. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nele. It's very interesting to hear some of the questions that you received once this initiative was implemented, and how your institution tried to, in many different ways, I hear, try to address that. I'm moving on straight away to Marta Aymerich from the Open University of Catalonia in Spain, also an institution that took an initiative to change the career assessment approach for early stage researchers. And very similarly, as I believe, they also then started receiving a lot of questions and had to figure out how do we raise that awareness, what this initiative is about. Marta, could you talk us through that for a minute?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon and good morning. Yes, exactly. We had to set a task force prepared for the university to sign DORA, and an action plan to make sure that the DORA content is actually implemented rather than just an expression of interest. And as you said, our first change was the postdoctoral research fellowship call, which is in an annual basis. So after signing DORA, the applicant's scientific output was not anymore based on the number of publications and the journal impact factor. We now assess the main scientific achievements of the applicant's choice. This may include, and we had to write it in the text of the call, because some questions were raised about that. So we have also a specific text saying that this may include, but are not limited to, preprints, publications, training given, contribution to consortia, scientific dissemination, patents, key databases, software, standardization tasks, white papers, work in industry or other sectors, etc. We clearly state in the text of the call that the journal impact factor should not be included when listing articles or publications. So the applicants need to describe the accomplishments in a brief, qualitative manner, emphasizing the significance on their career and their scientific and or societal impact. So we take a broad view of the societal impact of research. That includes any contribution by research to society, including relationships with economic and industrial sector, knowledge transfer and co-creation with civil society organizations and other actors in society, or collaboration with the public sector and other stakeholders. And any positive feedback from different stakeholders on the research carried out, its influence on public policies, the participation of patients or other groups affected by the research in the process of knowledge creation, as well as the dissemination and communication of research results are valued positively. We explain them that these scientific accomplishments will be assessed according to the criteria that are provided in a rubric within the same text of the call. This was not the case at the first call, but we had to include it after some questions and appeals to the call. So the task force was really pivotal for capacity building in terms of both defining achievements and for designing rubrics to guide evaluators and applicants. And it was also critical for advocacy and community engagement to help explain the new process in this call, in this postdoctoral call. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marta. So it's very interesting to see how that these requests for information, really, you see two institutions where there was just not necessarily a negative reaction, but just a request for information, give us more information, and then trying to figure out how to reply to that. I'm moving on, since we're short on time as always, I'm moving on to a second challenge that came across in many different case studies, but especially, and I'm looking at our colleagues, Henrika Mustajoki and Jana Polonen from the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies in Finland, where there was a challenge of the assessment capacity in the Finnish national system. This was a case study where I think the objectives and the long-term goal was very clearly identified, but then they were confronted with, there is a challenge of capacity here, and this is now, as I understand it, guiding your work for the foreseeable future. Jana, I think, if you could walk us through that a little bit.
Thank you, Brecht, and good afternoon from Helsinki. As you point out in the excellent report, reforming assessment culture requires a considerable amount of knowledge and time and effort and resources. And the capacity of individual institutions is often very limited. And the challenges are both political, meaning how to build trust and commitment to change, and practical, how to operationalize responsible assessments. And the starting point for cultural change is to create a shared understanding of why reform is needed and what responsible assessment means for our institution or our community. And it helps if institutions can build on dialogue and shared experiences between research communities at national and international levels. In our case, the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies facilitated the dialogue by inviting representative bodies of the national research community to produce the recommendation for responsible evaluation of a researcher in Finland. In turn, of course, our national working group was able to build on the insights and momentum for change that was created by international declarations like DORA. But we have found that even when there is a broad commitment to reform, the implementation of responsible assessment guidelines takes place at institutions which, of course, all have their diverse circumstances, challenges, needs, and goals. And institutions may still find that turning the vision into reality is at least partly beyond their own capacity. And this brings us to the main goals of rewarding researchers for open science practices. This is also the goal of our national recommendation, but we have found that this is easier said than done. in practice. And one of the reasons is that moving away from the narrow focus on research publications requires reliable, comprehensive, and comparable information on all the other aspects of academic work to be used as criteria in assessment fairly. So this may require in institutions technical investment in improving research information system, for example, so that researchers can in the first place register and report diverse outputs, activities, and impacts, or produce narrative descriptions in a form that is useful for the assessment. So our national recommendation also has an implementation plan, which includes development of national level infrastructure and services to support more qualitative and diverse assessments locally. So we have had a good start, but it seems that there is indeed a lot of work to be done. And we are trying also to move forward also in an international context with the development of open science infrastructures dedicated to supporting assessments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jana. I really like the way you said it, is that sort of the willingness is there, and then the work really starts after that, because suddenly you get into what is the capacity we have, where are the gaps, and what do we need to move forward. Thank you so much to our speakers for these first few findings. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Anna, who's going to take us through the next dimension of the case study findings.
Thank you so much, Brecht. So of course, another aspect of institutional change is understanding who was involved. And from the case studies in the report, it's very clear that it's a constellation of actors that participate in the development of new policies and practices, but these can vary across institutions and consortia. But there definitely were a few commonalities that we saw. And one of these commonalities was that coalition building is important to gain that bottom-up support for change. And there were a few examples, particularly from the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, which we'll see a video from Neil later, was that libraries are well positioned to do this work as a centralized resource on campus with expertise in bibliometrics. But there was also very visible involvement from research managers, human resources, university leaders, and researchers themselves, really just underscoring that this is a group effort that requires participation from a lot of different people. And so this largely, what I've just described relates to institutional change at institutions and universities, but it's slightly different at the level of a national consortia. So I'm really excited to invite Kim Huppinen from VSNU and the Dutch Recognition and Rewards programs to sort of comment on the types of stakeholders that were involved from the angle of a national internet initiative. Excuse me.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for inviting me, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So indeed, I'm a program manager on a program we call Recognition and Rewards in Academia. And I've this role since January of last year. And in this program, we really work together with universities, university medical centers, research institutes, research funders, and the Royal Academy in the Netherlands. And I think it's really great that everyone found each other in the last couple of years, and that we really work together. And we also have an implementation board of this transition program on the level of board members of all these different participating organizations. But I think more important is that we, all the participating institutions, installed their own recognition and rewards committee. So we have 18 recognition and rewards committees now in the Netherlands. and they all work on a change program for their own institution. So if I might look a little bit back, so how things started in the Netherlands, I think the first visible step in our process was a statement by VSNU, the Association of Universities, the Netherlands Federation of University Medical Centers and Funders, NWO and ZonMW, in 2018 on recognition and rewards of academics. At the end of 2019, we published our position paper, Room for Everyone's Talent, and that's a position paper by all the universities, all the medical centers, and the funders and the Royal Academy. So the really broad, it's a really broad coalition of all stakeholders in higher education and research in the Netherlands. And what we think is that we see a mismatch between what we deem important in academic work and what we reward our academic staff for. Our consortium's aim is to realize a fundamental change in behavior and leadership with regard to the recognition and reward systems for academia and academics. So we need a better balance in how we recognize and reward academics to help us achieve excellent education, research, societal impact, and leadership, as well as the highest level of patient care in our university hospitals. And there's broad consensus now that this change is needed. Different stakeholders work together, and we really appreciate the support we get from our government, although in the Netherlands, universities and research institutes have a lot of autonomy. So we aim for a healthy and inspiring environment for our academic staff where all talents are valued. And we are talking about a change of culture, because we are aware that changing procedures and forms does not equal changing culture and assessment. Changing culture is really difficult and takes a long time. And a broad dialogue in academia is important to really realize this culture change and this different way of looking at academic assessment and looking at careers in academia. And we want to realize a bottom-up movement, because scholars really need to be able to discuss this issue of recognition and rewards and influence how they are assessed. The idea is that we are diverging now a little bit. So the starting point is our position paper, Room for Everyone's Talent. This position paper is discussed in all the different universities, university medical centers, research institutes. So a lot of academics, scholars, they really get a voice in this process. And at some point we will bring back together experiments, pilots, profiles used, narratives used, and the idea is that we will, with all these material, the next step will be setting up a national framework for assessment, development, and promotion. Did I answer your question in this way?
Yes. Yeah, that was so fantastic. And I think hearing about how all of the different types of stakeholders were involved in that way. So you had mentioned, it was not just VSNU, but it was also the research institutes themselves and the funding agencies, as well as the Royal Academy. And I think this, highlights that research assessment is a systems challenge, and you really need all of these different stakeholders working together in the way you described to make progress. So thank you so much for that. And I think one of the other key themes from the report was this creation of committees, working groups, and task forces. And now these could be sort of standing committees that stay with an institution or a national consortia, or they can be task and finish groups that we've seen. And now I'm pleased to invite Finn Aymerich Johansen to share your experience with the university's Norway National Consortium and how the working group that you guys assembled were able to bring in different perspectives and how that was helpful in pushing your agenda forward.
Thank you, Anna. So first, let me just give you a very brief overview of the sort of landscape in Norway. So we have a few older universities that have a full sort of breadth of academic disciplines, humanities, social sciences, law, medicine, and natural sciences. And then we have a number of more recent universities or regional colleges that have a larger focus on teaching, nurses, teachers, and so forth. And then we have the national organization, which is an umbrella organization equivalent to the EUA, the Universities of Norway. And all of these universities, and some are also called colleges, are underneath this umbrella. And it's the Universities of Norway that assembled this working group. And in the working group, people like myself, who's a scientist from the University of Oslo, were the ones that were recruited. And all the scientists in the working group actually came from the older full breadth universities. And we also had a representation from the Young Academy in Norway. And we had very good backing and support of people who sort of know the research assessment field, from the more technical side to support us. But then, so we've been working for a while, and we finished quite recently a report which includes a guide for assessment of researcher in Norway. And I think I've presented this quite a bit, different universities and colleges in Norway, and others in the working group has also presented this, and it's been very positively received. And I think the key is that it is a very flexible guide, because now that the universities of Norway have done sort of our share making this guide, it's up to each institution and also funding agencies to actually put this into effect at their home site, sort of, where they are located, because they're the ones that are going to do the assessment of researchers in connection with hiring, promotions, and also grants. So the key, I think, for us has been that we have made a very flexible template that can be adjusted so that it will fit the different universities and the different situation where they would want to use it. And I think the key is that we also had the Research Council of Norway as part of the working group, because for scientists, it's very important to obtain funding. And if the funding agencies sort of say this is how you have to do something, then they are going to do it that way. So I think that will also help change the culture. So that was pretty much. So now we're really at we're sort of the halfway mark, in a sense, in that the working group has we have put our guide forth, and then it's up to the institutions to really take it to the next step.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Finn. I think it's so interesting to hear about how all of gaining such a broad perspective and then putting that together to sort of develop the guidelines that then go into the implementation phase. So thank you so much to both of our panelists for this sort of discussion of the dimension of who participates in the change process and who can participate. And of course, another dimension of institutional change is motivation. And I'm very pleased to pass it back over to Brecht, who will pick up on this point.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Indeed, so the next dimension of the findings that we discuss at more length and detail in the report is the why, the motivation for change. Now, I want to point out that many of the speakers that we're very happy to have here with us today are in large part sort of the driving forces. They've committed a lot of time and effort to building these initiatives. But if we take back one step and look at the broader picture, across these case studies, across these initiatives, you see that there are recognizably similar internal drivers and external influences that sort of drive these initiatives, that motivate them for change. And that's not to say that each case study is the same. It's always a different combination of drivers and influences that make each case different, but there are some recognizable similarities. Now, for the purposes of this webinar, I just want to invite a couple of speakers to talk about specifically the ambiguous role, we've called it, that external influences can play for these initiatives, because we have found in the case studies that sometimes the external influences help an initiative, and sometimes they can strain an initiative. And I first want to go to, again, Marta Aymerich from the Open University of Catalonia, because this is an institution that has taken this initiative in a national and regional system where the career assessment of professors of later stage academics is heavily centralized. There's clear national and regional rules and regulations, and that can be a challenge for an institution like the Open University that wants to change its approach for early stage researchers. So Marta, can you just sort of explain a little bit more about how that is challenging and how your institution is trying to deal with that?
Yes, thank you. Definitely, it is a challenge, because the major barrier for the implementation of new academic assessment practices at the faculty level is this centralized external accreditation system for faculty career progression, which is mainly based on journal-based metrics. And so the alignment with national, international dominant procedures is really something that we have to take into account, because journal-based metrics are still commonly used to measure academic success at other institutions. So even in our postdoctoral call, researcher fellowship call that we implemented the change, there is a concern, because for early career researchers who might become a disadvantage when they seek career opportunities elsewhere. So we have really an absence of incentivizing policies, and we need, and again, the academic mindset change is also a drawback that we have to consider, because the traditional assessment system incentivizes researchers to produce scientific outputs, mainly publications. Yeah, for sure, measuring research capacity with publication is not indeed a misguided way to do so. You mentioned it in the introduction, because publishing is a scientific theory. We need for sure to share our research findings. However, the scientific paper is not the ultimate goal, and is it just a means, I would say, or an output, if you will, but not yet an outcome. And our goal is to be in constant transformation, being aware of the context, but always bearing in mind to do not harm researcher careers, changing it quickly and radically. So we started changing the criteria for postdoctoral researcher recruitment, and for those procedures highly dependent on the national government agency, that is faculty promotion, we will follow closely how they are transforming research assessment. So we know that exploring innovative approaches to research assessment, we would like to incentivize researchers to share, collaborate, and increase quality and impact of their research. So the external systems of research assessment would have to change, of course, but in the meantime, maybe universities can introduce more qualitative internal research assessment criteria, and we are just a small institution in a big teaching and research system, and we would like you, we would like to invite you to join us. So we are keen to contribute to the process as much as we can in order to transform assessment towards a more open and responsible research system. But in the meantime, we have to live with it, with the external centralized system based on journal metrics and our will to change this system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. I think really it is sort of and this is really why it's fascinating, especially in your case study, it's an issue of consistency almost, where you as an institution are free to change the assessment approach for early stage researchers, but then there's really the question of, well, what happens, because they know at a later stage they will have to deal with different criteria. And you also mentioned, and this is also very important, is that what happens then with people who want to find opportunities in other institutions or internationally, again, so the issue of consistency. And that is, I think, if I can just add to that, why for EUA, we've been very clear that this is a shared responsibility. We have here today, I think, a lot of very good examples of universities, national consortia of stakeholders that are taking initiatives, and as you say, can take initiatives to improve the quality, but ultimately policymakers, research funders will also have to come on board. And indeed, there is already some work being done there to move together and resolve that issue of consistency, both within one national system and then internationally. That is an example of an external influence that is constraining an initiative, but I want to finish this dimension of our findings on a positive note. And I'm going to give the floor to Finn-Erik Johansen from the University of Oslo in Norway, because that is a case study where we found that actually the external influences can also be a real source of inspiration for their own initiative. So Finn-Erik, if you want to walk us through that for a minute.
Thank you. So yeah, we also have this, which was brought up, concern that within Norway, we have, it's actually regulated by law, the government universities requirements to become a promotion to be a full professor. And when I presented the work from our working group, our guide for research assessment, that's one of the questions I always get: is the law going to have to change? But the other question, and the most important question that I've been getting, and that most researchers are concerned about, is what about everywhere else in the world? What if Norway changes its practices? Is that going to make us not employable in other countries? We are a small country, and we are dependent on mobility of scientists and researchers throughout Europe and also the United States. So I must say, on the one hand, I think we try to sort of quench the fears of some researchers that Norway is moving too fast. And we also try to encourage them that by moving a little bit faster than the pack, we can also influence a little bit where the pack is going. And that's sort of the strategy of the Norwegian working group. And we've been working together also with the Dutch and with you, Brecht, in Europe. And I think the possibility to affect how it's being seen, or how research assessments is being done elsewhere in Europe and the world, and move away a little bit from this sort of, let's say, toxoholic work culture that some research environments have, and appreciate more of what researchers do, has also encouraged Norwegians to participate and to, I would say, for the most part, embrace the changes that we are preparing for.
Yeah, thank you so much. So indeed, I think it's also mentioned on the slide, this concern that you also share with, for example, the Dutch case study, is the concern of first mover disadvantage. Again, international consistency. If we ask something that deviates from the international norm to our researchers and academics, then will there perhaps be barriers for them to move internationally? But as you mentioned, it is also a source of inspiration. We indeed have been working very closely together, and there's more and more contacts that we can also see between the different national systems, between institutions, on how are we trying to take initiatives to move forward. With that being said, again, thank you to my speakers here. I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Anna for the last dimension of our case study findings.
Thank you so much, Brecht. So how institutional change occurs for research assessment was really the main element we were trying to dig in and understand. And indeed, it overlaps and is interrelated with some of the elements that we've already discussed today. But what we found is that there's an interplay between top-down and bottom-up dynamics for change. And for bottom up, what we really see is the long process of informal contacts and leveraging existing networks that will lead to a build up that pushes towards change. And this bottom up aspect was evident in nearly all of the cases. And indeed, all 3 national consortia are in the case study repository are examples of bottom up change. And when we look at this from the advantage of, so you have sort of the bottom grassroots network doing the coalition, working on the ground, and then you also need support from the top. So we look at this as sort of like bottom up and then top down support. And what we learned from examining change from the top is that you either need people in leadership positions such as university administrators to be supportive, but at the very least, not produce obstacles. And I think a great example of top down and bottom up change working together comes from the University Medical Center Utrecht. And I'm very happy to have Rinsa Benedictus and Frank Medina with us today to sort of give us both of those viewpoints. So how did it look doing the grassroots from the bottom angle, but then also hearing from Frank his perspective as a university administrator at that time. So I'm pleased to welcome Rinsa and Frank. If you'd like to turn on your cameras now. And then Rinsa, why don't you start with sort of your angle from that bottom up, and then Frank, you can fill in any gaps and give your perspective towards from the top down.
Yes, Anna, thank you for your kind introduction, and good day to everyone from all around the world. Yeah, I'd like to say a few words indeed about how we changed our incentives and rewards, but not before recapitulating quickly why and what we did. So like Kim already alluded to, also at the University Medical Center, we believe there was a mismatch between what we're supposed to be doing, improving health for our perspective, and the things we were rewarding. One metaphor that was often used for that is that the current incentive and reward system, heavily informed by bibliometric indicators, could be compared to looking for your keys in the night under the street light. You look where you can maybe see them, but of course this is a very limited view. It leaves certain questions undone. It underappreciates certain fields, and we really believe we had to broaden that street light to more broadly appreciate a range of scholarly activities. We did this at multiple levels in our institution. So for associate professors and for professors, we introduced a qualification portfolios where they had to describe themselves on 5 domains. So really formalizing this broadening up. Recently, we introduced something similar for PhD candidates. And at the institutional level, we go through a formal evaluation every so many years. We more or less did the same. So we made it mission-based. What is the mission of your research group? What are the goals related to that? And describe how you get there. And we asked them to involve societal stakeholders. So this is all the results of many years. Indeed, how did we get there? Yeah, this was really indeed that interplay between stimulation from the top and where our dean really opened up this discussion by really challenging established evaluation practices, but also making them open for discussion. And then we had a lot of discussions with a lot of research group. What I found most fruitful was having a discussion with a research group, with the professors and the postdocs and the PhD students, everybody in the room, and then just asking the question, why are you doing what you are doing? And how does the current incentive and reward system relate to that? And that really created positive, sometimes some friction, but also a sort of awareness that indeed this mismatch is real and we should change it. So then we set out to do all the things I just described, but of course they were not just implemented from the top down. We organized a lot of debates and workshops and discussion, and for the actual new guidelines, of course, we installed committees representing the entire variety of disciplines in the University Medical Center, and also along different career phases, so as to be representative and really also let early and young career researchers help define what they should be evaluated on. But like I said, this could not have happened without the stimulating leadership of our dean, who really opened up this discussion. So maybe that's a bridge to Frank.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rinse. I think we should be careful not to put too much, say, honor on my person, but because I think that most people who are dean or on the board of a large medical center recognize what we have been recognizing. This is not new. People have seen it, but many people, of course, felt inhibited or found it very difficult to imagine that it could change. And so this is of course, this is very important. So I think that as soon as what Rinse described, as soon as you start to discuss this, like, do I see what you see? Do we all see the same? And can we not, is change possible? Then there's eventually, and that's the good news, then a lot of people say 90% of people say, yes, this is of course ridiculous. So we are overvaluing the specific types of research because it gets into specific type of journals, DORA, and some of the fields that are extremely important, clinically, societal impact, they don't score in the metrics, and we are just wasting them. They don't get the money, they don't get the professorships. And so immediately people realize this is, of course, nonsense. And then, of course, it takes some time to get this awareness going, which has also been described by the previous speakers. And this awareness is coming from the top. Like, we from the board have the feeling that we should change. And then, of course, if there's a grassroots meeting or a grassroots, say, movement, or that is what we have, an open science community of young people, postdocs, early career scientists, who also have the feeling that they are not, say, being well treated, and that the things that should be done are not done because they are not scoring in the metrics. And if that meets, say, on the marketplace in the middle of the hospital, I just see it for me. This is exactly sort of how you can see it. Then things are changing. And of course, changing it from the top is impossible, because people have to realize what's going on. And I think what's very important, and that we don't hear that too much, is explain again and again the higher purpose. Explain why we need this. This is not because we hate nature or science. This is not because we hate Elsevier. This is really because we want to do a better job for society. And nobody is against that. That's peace for the world. Everybody is of course going for that. So it's very important to go for the higher purpose and to show, if you change this, if you do all these very difficult things, have these difficult discussions as a dean, but also from the bottom, then eventually you can do a better job. And everybody, most of the people want to do a better job. Of course, they fear that they lose, and the former elites, they will lose a little bit of their, say, higher reputation, etc. But eventually, of course, the higher purpose is extremely important, because if you lose track of the higher purpose, then it will be only technical, say, changes which will not help you, and that's not the idea. And this is a very important in the end. And the other thing which is very important for everybody to realize, there is no one template, there's no one framework. So even in one medical center, there are totally different, say, academic products. from radiotherapy to say models for treating patients with depression to molecular biology of cancer. These sciences are totally different and have totally different outputs. And that should fit within a generic template, but it should be extremely generic. And then, of course, if you explain to people from the top, which I have been doing, you see how I talk about it now. So with a lot of emphasis, there is no one hoop. You originally, before DORA, we had the journal impact factor hoop. We all had to go through that one hoop, but now there are many hoops, and you can decide for your own field, for your own strategy, for your own even department. How do you want to be, say, judged based on your own strategy, mission, and goals? And for many academics, that's a relief, and for some, that creates a lot of uncertainty, because how can we compare? How can I now compare cardiology in Groningen with cardiology in Utrecht, etc., etc.? These questions all have been coming. And now I give the microphone back to Rinse, because, of course, eventually those people have to really do it in the departments, close to the postdocs and PhDs. Rinse, if he has a minute left, he should finish off.
Yeah, I could say a few words, but maybe Anna, do you have any questions so far, or do you want me to elaborate a bit more on Frank's points?
What I really liked about your points, Frank, was the emphasis on explaining the higher purpose, and really digging into sort of what are the mission and values of the institution, and how do you align your academic career assessment practices with those. So I think I would be really interesting to hear your take, Rinse, on how do you, because that's a really big ask. It's to sort of like align those two together. So how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, well, it starts with recognizing this diversity. So indeed, like Frank alluded to, there's from nursing science to molecular biology in one university medical center with very different outputs, maybe different publics, different stakeholders, but at the same time we were sort of under the illusion that we could capture all that variety in a few metrics and make them objectively and comparable, etc. Which was of course very convenient for many people, also for administrators, to be able to judge all those very different disciplines along one universal measure. However, so a big deal of our discussions were, okay, let's recognize that variety, and let's recognize that people in a lab do different things than people in a clinic, for example. We had a very productive workshop where I asked a range of people to bring with them figuratively an example of research impact, and which they then presented, and which we then discussed with the group and sort of tried to analyze, okay, but how did you arrive at that impact? And the examples were, of course, very different, from understanding cell division to implementing a guideline for general practitioners. But we found that a lot of the underlying processes were very similar. And this really helped to understand, okay, so there's a lot of variety, there's also similarity as well, but we can capture that, but we need different tools, and we need a more narrative-based evaluation, a process-based evaluation. We need to understand someone's mission, and then we can still come up with a generic framework for research evaluation, but of course it will not be a single metric or a couple of metrics that will capture it all. So aligning with the mission of a research group is important, but I think it importantly starts with understanding that there is not a single template for research evaluation across all fields.
What's also interesting for Anna and for the people who listen in, this of course asks for a very explicit discussion about what are we going to do in the coming 6 years in a research group, apart from getting something published, getting some grants, but also really reflecting on what do we want to do, where can we contribute to society, to in our case to health, and so this asks for explicit discussions, which we found out also in the national discussion about research evaluation is not common practice in many institutes, to our surprise. There are many institutes where people just go about publishing and getting grants, and they do fine. And that there is no idea, or there's too little discussion about, so what do we really want to achieve, and what are we aiming for, and also making choices. And so people found that also pretty tough to discuss that and to think about it, that should now be also something in universities or in university medical centers. But I think this is wonderful. That doesn't mean there's no room for basic science. There's a lot of room for basic science. But the thing you have to reflect on is the context. What is your context? So what is the idea, the higher purpose?
Absolutely.
And I think the best, because we are Dutch, I think we should now end just saying amen.
Well, thank you so much, Frank and Rinza. Very much appreciated your thoughts. And I'm pleased now to go on to the next part of the agenda. So as those who are familiar with the case studies know, that 9 out of 10 of the cases come from Europe. And the other case is from the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China. And I'm very pleased to share a brief video from Neil Smith, the Associate Director of Research and Learning at the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, about their change processes. And he's really here to help provide sort of a non-European perspective to the webinar. As you all know, DORA is a global initiative, and this digital repository is intended to include cases from all parts of the world. We plan to continue adding cases, so please do get in touch, especially if you are an organization or an institution from outside of Europe and would like to be considered for a case study. We'd very much like to continue that discussion. And now I'm very pleased to share the video so we can all hear from Neil.
Hello from Ningbo in China. My name is Neil. I'm excited to be participating in this event, frustrated that I can't be with you, and curious to hear more about your experiences. The report says 9 out of 10 case studies are from the Western world. I'm delighted to be representing China. Anna asked me to record a video and say a few words about my reactions to your case studies. The first thing is right there in the title when we think about responsible. I've always thought about DORA and research assessment. Now we have career assessment, and this feels right. I also love how we are reimagining open. So again, I've always thought about open access to information, open access to publications, open access to data. Today, I think more about open and scholarship. I think about open and career assessment. I think about open and place of publication. Are our publications public to be made available to the public through universities? If a wide range of evidence is going to be used for academic career assessment, do they need to be open? DORA is about the career assessment of people we work with. We are involved in important personal conversations with people. The anxiety when applying for promotion, sometimes the hurt, blame, and anger when academic staff are unsuccessful. It's also about us. It can be lonely advocating for change. We can feel disappointed, frustrated, or overwhelmed. We need to be proud of the progress we have made. Sometimes we move in ways that some people think is forward and others think it's moving back. And that's okay. We zig and we zag. That's one of the things I love about this event, the report, and this project. There's a shared sense of belonging in work that makes a difference. DORA is also about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Institutions must prioritize equity. It's right there in the report. Implementing DORA for the University of Nottingham was always about shared values. Some people may be disadvantaged in career assessment. Women are more likely to take career breaks or periods of part-time work for carer responsibilities. People may have disabilities affecting their research productivity. So New policies and practices should be equity tested for unintended consequences before being used in career assessment. So we're all working in systems. DORA can feel like a heavy weight we're trying to pull across the university campus. We can also feel tangled in systems. There are processes within our universities, there are national and global systems and processes. So can any university really implement DORA alone? Today, I'm speaking in China. I hope you will collaborate with China again. This could be in a similar project to this one to raise awareness, develop new knowledge and understanding, and for community engagement, all to influence new policy and practice. So we've all made a little progress in implementing DORA, and that's right there in all the case studies in the report. So thank you, Anna, for inviting me to participate in this event and the project. And I hope there will be opportunities for further future collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, that was great to hear also from outside of Europe, because we've now arrived at the Q&A session, and I do see that one of the questions indeed was the repository and the report indeed has mostly case studies from Europe, but as my colleague Anna already said previously, the repository is open for anyone who would like to be included. And indeed, we are looking for case studies, initiatives from across the globe. This is very clearly not just something that happens in Europe. So we are also looking internationally. Now, during the Q&A session now, I think most of you indeed have found the Q&A function in Zoom webinar, and I encourage you to ask more questions, but we already have quite a few questions to begin with. So I think, as always, I probably have to start by apologizing. We're probably not going to be able to answer every question, but we are picking out a few that are quite pertinent to some of the messages we are bringing here today. And there's one question, it's very short actually, is an audience member asked, we hear the word culture here. It was on the slides at the start, and some of the speakers talk about the cultural change in academia, but what does that actually mean? Can you make that more specific? And I know a lot of our speakers are going to have something to say about this, but I'd like to maybe pass this on to my colleague from the Netherlands, Kim Huypen from VSNU, because I believe in her position paper of VSNU, there was quite a lot of concrete suggestions in terms of what would a new academic culture look like. Kim, if you can talk us through that for a minute.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, and yeah, both. I think our consortium both works on this concept of academic culture and culture change. This question might be about both concepts, and I would like to say first, I totally agree with Frank Miedema that we really have to keep on explaining why we like to see a different academic culture than we are seeing at this moment. And one of these reasons Frank Miedema explained is we want to do better for society. But another very important driver for us in the Netherlands is also that we aim for a healthy and inspiring environment for our academic staff. So at the universities, university medical centers, research institutes themselves. So it's really about this academic environment, about this academic culture that we like to see things changing. And one of the main issues for us in the Netherlands is also, I think, this balance between individual scientists or scholars and the team. So what we like to see is that there is a better balance, and that there is a safer and more inclusive work culture that accommodates the complexity and interdisciplinary nature of academic and social problems. And we're really looking for a greater balance also in teams and in research careers, that people, that scientists or scholars with different talents have opportunities in their career, and that you can work together both in a team at your own institution, for example, in a research group, that you can work together with people with different talents, but that you can also work together in interdisciplinary teams with people from other institutions, from outside of the Netherlands, of course, as well. And we really need to recognize these team efforts, really recognized working together in academia to well, to really be able to give an answer, a scientific answer on important questions, important challenges the world is facing at this moment. Thank you, Brecht, for asking me this question.
No, thank you, because I think indeed in this example in particular, how are teams acknowledged in the current career assessment approach, I think, is one of the very fascinating parts of this position paper. I'm also going to open the floor to any of the other speakers if they would want to weigh in on what ultimately is the goal here. If we talk about academic cultural change, what would that mean? How could you make that, if possible, a bit more specific? Is there anyone who wants to talk about that?
Can I add? Frank speaking. I think I fully agree with Kim, and we have had discussions, of course, in the country before, but I think it's a very good point to bring up. I'm not naive, but I have a hope that if you have a more realistic, inclusive, system of expectations of what academics and also other staff have to do and are expected to be doing in university, more realistic, fair, inclusive, and also paying attention to the different forms of excellence, that for many people will be a relief, because then they don't have to all go through the same hoop or 7 or 8 hoops, and they have a chance. They can really concentrate on the things that they really want to do, because that's also, they can be assured now that they can also make a career in university by just doing this 1 or 2 or 3 things, that they really like and are devoted to. So I think that may be naive, but I think that will take a lot of pressure away, I hope.
Yes. Okay. I'm just going to alternate with a very, very quick question, because this was a very broad and existential question. There was one very specific question about to Marta from the Open University of Catalonia. There was basically the question, the rubrics you mentioned that are part of your initiative, are those rubrics publicly available, or will they become publicly available? And I asked that question, but I also see that a lot of the other speakers, and I thank you for that, are sort of sharing a lot of links to information and documentation that you have from your own initiatives. But Marta specifically, are these rubrics available online?
Yes, so that's the answer, short answer. Yeah. But however, they are within the call of postdoctoral research fellowships call. So Jana, I just wanna find it and I will post it in the chat right now. So yeah, you can use it if you like, and if you can build on it, we will be happy to know how to build on it and change the next call for the next year, and being more and more better at explaining how to assess alternatively the achievements, the research achievements. Thank you for the question.
It was a very short question, but thank you so much for doing this, because I think this is really, as my colleague Anna said at the beginning of this webinar, it was the inspiration for this entire project, is that we see so many amazing initiatives, and really all of this, the report, repository, this webinar is us hoping to bring that to a much broader audience. So thank you for your answer. There's quite a few other questions. I'm just sort of going through a couple of them now. There was one question that caught my eye, It's again perhaps a challenging question, but it's a question about, based on, I think, Nele Brakke from Ghent University in Belgium, and I'm going to try and pass it on to you. What you said in your intervention was, it's once we took the initiative and we went for a more narrative approach to career assessment, we immediately got a lot of questions from professors asking, well, how do I do this? How do I fill this out? Do you have a template here? And the question that we got at that point in the Q&A session box here is, well, how do you then encourage people? How do you encourage academics that perhaps have sort of been accustomed to checking certain boxes in a career assessment exercise? How do you encourage them to take those opportunities of a narrative approach? How do you encourage them to sort of take responsibility and sort of really present their unique case for, this is what I've been doing? Nele, could you comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Brecht. Well, I think that some of our academics did not really need encouragement. I think that once they understood what we were aiming for, that they were kind of happy to talk or to write down what they did in the different domains in a narrative way. And just to explain, narrative does not mean that they cannot mention any numbers. If people have a story to tell about a high quality paper or about academic or scientific impact, they're allowed to do so. But we need the context and the story, that's one thing. And another thing is that after the narrative has been written, the professors have a conversation with their HR committee. So if there are still doubts or if there is still need for clarification about what we exactly mean by a narrative about teaching, research, and the other domains, there is a space, there is a place and a moment to talk about that. And in the HR committees, you also have HR policy advisors who bring in a lot of expertise from the HR domain. Because quite often from academics, we get this reflection, well, we do not speak that language, but then you have someone to talk to and who can guide you through the process. So it's actually a constant dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I follow up on this? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so your question about how researchers should or need to be stimulated in filling out this more narrative-based CV or portfolio. So we've been working with variants of that for a couple of years. So sometimes people find it a lot of work, but generally they appreciate the fact that they are now able to better show what they have been doing. A lot of the criticism or critique, if you will, comes from then the committee or the people higher up who then have to actually read those longer documents and compare them, which they find a lot more difficult than comparing people based on their quantified research output. So we've been, so I'm generalizing a bit here, but so on one hand, there's people who are happy that they can now show what they do, but on various committees throughout the years, researchers find it very difficult then to use them. And we really have to sort of teach them and stimulate them. Yes, so this is how we now approach research evaluation. And yes, it's maybe subjective and complex. However, this is it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
And of course, we promised them that if they put it in their CV that they did spend time on this type of activities to invest in quality of science, they will be rewarded.
Indeed. I'm sorry, I have sort of half an eye on the Q&A box and half an eye on the time, I'm afraid. 1 hour and a half has sort of flown by. And I'm well aware that there's quite a few other questions that we would have loved to address, but I'm afraid we are going to have to close this session. I'm going to have to pass the word back to my colleague Anna, who's going to wrap up this session. From my side, in any case, thank you all for attending. I've really quite enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, Brecht, and thank you so much to all of the panelists. So, when we were sort of going through the cases and comparing and analyzing them, a lot of similarities came up and key themes that we've been finding that we provide as recommendations. And I think based on sort of previous documents, they sound very familiar and they should sort of feel familiar, which is, to go for the open, accurate, transparent, responsible practices, focus on, raising awareness and engaging with the academic community and building capacity, and aim for institutional initiatives that are backed by a concerted approach. And with that, I'd like to say thank you so much to our panelists, not only for joining us today, but for being willing to share the lessons learned from their own efforts to improve academic assessment with us, and not only with us, but to the broader academic community. And I also want to say thank you to the other organizations that contributed case studies but couldn't join us for the webinar as well. And thank you so much to Neil Smith, who joined in as a video participant. And right before we close, I want to say a special thank you to EUA and SPARC Europe for working with DORA on this project. It's been such a great collaboration. All three of our organizations are very committed to working on this in the months and years ahead. And like I said before, we plan on continuing to add case studies to the repository. Our goal is really to make it a living resource to the community. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. We're so glad that you tuned in, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.